Good evening and welcome to Wordpath, the show about Oklahoma Indian languages and the people who are teaching and preserving them. My guests tonight are Dr. Marcia Haag and Mr. Henry Willis, both of whom are specialists in the Choctaw language. Marcia was on a show before where she talked about, she's a linguist, and she talked about the structure and grammar of Choctaw. And Henry Willis we haven't had on before. I'm very pleased to have you tonight, Henry. He's a native speaker of Choctaw and will teach us a little bit of Choctaw and speak for us some samples of the language and share some of his experiences with us as well. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
It's very nice to have you. I usually start off, Henry, when we have a native speaker of a language on the program, asking them to teach us how to greet a person in your language.
Okay, we'll start off with the word hello. Halito.
Halito.
Chimachukma. Are you feeling well? Are you well? Then
so that's what you would normally
that's
say
what
to someone
the first person. And the second person would say Amachukma hoke. Chishnato. I feel very well. And you?
Okay. For those of us who are not very advanced in Choctaw, what's the very simplest exchange you could do? Can you just say halito?
Halito. That's right.
And say the same thing back?
Yes, same thing. You say halito, and the person would say halito.
Okay, halito.
Halito.
Oh, but let me ask you one more thing, because
Sure.
this varies from language to language. Does that halito ever change depending on how many people you're talking to, or any kind of a variation like that? It's just kind of like English hello, then. It's just the same word.
That's right.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to get a little bit of background on each of you. Marcia, maybe we could start with you, and if you could just tell us a little bit. I know you're a linguist specializing in American languages. How did you happen to get involved with Choctaw in particular, and what's been your history with it?
Okay, well, I've told this story before, and it doesn't change. It's the same story. I arrived a bit by accident, and I had just moved to Norman, and I was a linguist, and I wanted to do American languages, and I needed one to work on. And it didn't really matter to me. I didn't have a particular choice. And so I asked one of the anthropologists in the anthropology department at the University of Oklahoma. I said, do you have any recommendations? Is there a language that needs someone to look at it or not, or what do you think? And he said, well, why don't you do Choctaw? And I said, sure, why Choctaw? And it came because Choctaw people were numerous, and therefore they would be easy to find. There are many Choctaw who live in urban settings, and that meant that I could find Choctaw people in Norman, Oklahoma City more, which was where I found Mr. Willis. And I wouldn't have to necessarily travel to Naniwaya down in the southeast corner, which I wasn't really. I had a little.
When you're doing research, really.
I had a little baby, and it wasn't going to. It's hard to get down there.
Yeah, especially with family obligations. But really, I know from studying Comanche quite a bit, when you have a 1 or 2 hour drive each way to some place, it really cuts into your work time, and it makes you much less efficient.
Right.
So it might sound sort of like a strange predilection to want to have somebody near at hand, but it's very helpful.
It was
in
very
terms
important.
Of
I knew I would
done.
get I knew I would get more work done if I could have someone at hand rather than having to go out and live in the woods for a while. And then another important thing was that Dr. Moore told me that the Choctaw people are friendly and welcome people who are interested in their language. And I said, I need someone who is going to understand what I'm after and is not going to be suspicious of the sort of work that we do, because as we all know, some groups are more suspicious than others of linguists, scientists, anthropologists, what have you, coming into their group and seeming to want things. But he felt that the Choctaw were not going to have a suspicious attitude toward me. And so I said, well, let me go. And so off I went to look for Choctaw. And certainly all of those things were true, particularly in Choctaw. What I found with the Choctaw people is that they are eager to disseminate their language to the four corners of the earth. And I'm going to take Mr. Willis's words. He has always told me that if all of the white people, or the Naholo, if all the Naholo could learn Choctaw, that would be an even better thing, because everyone should know Choctaw. It's a good thing to know. Yeah. So that attitude has helped a lot to be able to get in and work with very friendly and helpful speakers.
So you've had quite quite a team
Yeah, we have
effort
been
together, haven't you?
We've been collaborators for
several years
a long
now?
time. Yes, what, 92, I think.
Yes.
5 years. And you wrote a dissertation on some features of the structure of Choctaw.
Yes, I knew that I was going to write my dissertation on Choctaw. I didn't know what I was going to find, and so I began to get into the language, and as I got into the language, I found things that I couldn't have anticipated before I got into it. And some of the wonderful things about Choctaw that Henry has taught me, essentially, painstakingly. Some of this is very, very abstract. And we did have to suffer because there wouldn't be particularly the words to explain something very, very subtle going on in Choctaw. You couldn't just say it in English, and we would have to work our way slowly through it until I would finally catch on and say, this is what they're doing in Choctaw, and it would be marvelous. So my dissertation is written about several remarkable things in Choctaw that I have generalized to human language in general, and I've been able to find some of the features that I found in Choctaw I've applied to completely unrelated things like some of the Salishan languages up on the northwest coast do some of the things that Choctaw does that people hadn't really noticed before. So I felt very that I'd learned something wonderful from having jumped into Choctaw.
So was this a labor of great patience for you, Henry?
Well, I tell you, I think
it
it took a lot of patience for both of us, because there were times that it was hard to explain the meaning of such words. You know, we can use some words certain ways, and then again, there was other ways that we couldn't use, even though the sentences seemed to be similar. We still had to use another word that would take the place of that same word we're trying to define. And there had to be a lot of patience for both of us, because there was times that we had to just sit there, and she would go over and over with some of the sentences, and I'd try to go over them, but this is the way it is. Well, this is the way it is over here. So
my language doesn't always
come
fit
to
your
conclusions.
theory,
Being a linguist, she was sometimes going over my head of thinking, so I had to come up from the ways that we speak. Sometimes I had to study a little bit and come up with it later on at times, you know. And we just didn't dwell on it continuously. She would let me
take a little break.
Take a little break here now and then. That really helped.
Now, besides this rather intellectual analysis kind of work that you've done, you've also worked together in the classroom at OU.
Sure.
What has been your history
of
teaching together? Are you still doing that, or how long?
No. Well, I had a health I had to battle, and since then the university had restructured the department, so we're
so you're
now
not
working.
teaching together right now?
No.
How long did you teach together? A couple of years, wasn't it?
About 4 or 5 years.
We started in 92 or 3, and we taught all the way through until the last, all the way through 1996, when Henry developed health problems and had to give it up. And then I am no longer in the classroom at OU, and we have a new teacher. His name is Leroy Seeley from the Southeast, who, and if I can put in a plug for Leroy Seeley, he is to date the only teacher who has become certified with the tribe, with the Choctaw tribe of Oklahoma, as a teacher speaker. There, one can get that kind of certification, and he has been certified. So he has now taken over all 3 levels of the Choctaw language at OU, and this is his first semester, and I think that he probably would like to get his sea legs. But he's, you know, has jumped in very willingly.
I hope we can have him on a show later on too. I think we are hoping to do that. Henry, let me get a little more personal background from you now. As a Choctaw speaker, what was it like growing up? Did you speak only Choctaw in your early years?
In my early years, up to 7 years at least, I spoke nothing but Choctaw. And when I started school, I did not understand English, which gave me a little extra year to learn. Of course, I thought I was the only one that it happened to. but I met another person who was the father of one of the students we had in our classes, who was telling his story of how he entered the school and couldn't speak Choctaw, and we both failed in our primary years of our school. So I met a person that we got along pretty good. After that, we told of our experience in learning Choctaw, the language, English language, and for that reason, I guess sometimes it was hard to catch up in school. Of course, it took years to catch up and find.
I can imagine if I were in the same situation, having to go to school in Choctaw, not knowing any.
Well, I think because my parents did not speak English, that made it that much harder. My mother went to one day of school, she tells me, and my father went up to the 6th grade, but he spoke Choctaw fluently,
So
and we just spoke nothing
Choctaw
but Choctaw. And I wasn't taught any English language, any of the English language words.
So you probably weren't encouraged in your Choctaw at school, but you always,
That's right.
You always had it at home, didn't you?
Yeah, right.
That makes a big
At
difference.
school, we were forbidden to speak in that particular place because this was an orphanage home I was sent to because of the needs. So that was some years of experience I've had.
Wow. Let me ask you about one more project that you two are working on. Marcia, maybe you can kind of take the lead on this one, and that is the textbook that you're working on. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, when we gave up classroom work, one of our dreams has always been to do a real textbook in Choctaw. And we do now have a contract with the University of Oklahoma Press to produce a textbook. The deadlines on those manuscripts are very, very close, and so that's a full-time job getting that book out. It's going to be a very thorough work. It will appear in 2 volumes. There will be 40 chapters and 2 volumes, so this is not just the beginner's course. This is the whole thing, such that a teacher could take both volumes of the book and take students all the way through 4 semesters of Choctaw, which is more than anybody really does now. But our hope is that it will be the standard for pedagogy in the language. Because I think, as I'd mentioned to you before, we believe that the kind of effort that we're putting to this, and it's an appreciable amount of work. It's not likely that another group or another pair is going to be able to get it together again to make a work of this sort, and then find a publisher who will put it out and a market ready to do it. And so we really feel that this is the last best chance to do
Give it your best for all of the Choctaw students of the future. Now, I assume this would have grammar problems and exercises and things, or does it also concentrate on vocabulary, or is it primarily about the structure of Choctaw?
It looks very much like the kinds of language books that you would see in Spanish, German, Latin, and what have you. It's put together on the model of a real textbook. And
So a lesson has a little bit of each of these different aspects in it.
Exactly. It'll start with a little conversation in the beginning, and then there'll be the grammar lessons. There might be 2 or 3 of them. A big vocabulary section, and then a special section where we talk about special word uses. Henry was saying that in Choctaw you cannot just assume that the words match up with English. And you remember a few weeks ago when we talked about Choctaw, and I showed you absolutely cannot make the assumption that you can match them up. And so we take a little extra time to show special usages, and then a section on exercises, and a special feature is that several well-known anthropologists are doing special cultural vignettes on Southeast Indians, the origins of the Choctaw, the Mississippian culture.
Sounds like a wonderful
everything from the code talkers to the Choctaw newspapers. So
I can't wait to see it.
It's we're very hopeful.
That's wonderful. Henry, let me come back to you now. We were talking on the phone the other day about things that we might discuss on the program, and you offered to tell us a story. What was the name of the type of stories that you have in Choctaw? The one that means pigtail. How do you say that?
It's Shokanopa, called Shokanopa pigtail.
And so this is a whole tradition of different stories that you have in Choctaw?
It's a series of experience of an animal, a character. Many tribes have that. They have a certain character that has go through certain experiences, you know, different. And so we have the same type of stories in this. The main character is the opossum.
Very interesting. Would you please do us the honor of telling us one of these stories? Maybe you could tell us just in a sentence what the story is about, and then we'll hear it in Choctaw, and then you can explain it in more detail in English afterwards.
Okay, it's about opossum, how he ended up with a slick tail.
Great. Okay. I'd love to hear that.
Okay, you want the English first or
Let's
the
hear
Choctaw?
the Choctaw first, so we can
Okay.
just concentrate on the sound.
Okay, I'll continue. I'll start with this introduction of the story here, and it starts out like this. Hasilawan upaki hiwunama. Shokatayat hasimish tohbi dokushbi wunokshush hosh yukli hosha hattato. Ato on nahili ayukalik ma okla ogla aita fama gitu shokbika ato kung imonna ma ayano pali okla itikulo fa paknaka on hikita no pali ato kung iti kalofa ma on tikkia cha ano palachi ma istiafkin hama poni ila yo san hayato hama matukata aja hama kanimagat yamato shawiyo shumbe hata shawiyo hasimishat pisachukma amme machukma ma to kahani cha un tipo no tuma e ma un pisa ma shawashu impa equipo to gosh now who you start to now wakili about the college ahmad hanglok labe ama shokata na dishkina is pisa o chislong pisa kanya higia ma atuma katimichi hos jasimish basua bisachuk ma ishi katimichi shishkwito wichet ma shawayashu ha kloki labiti hipa nana hipa jinga hu yush hikikin to pisha charge kan ho nana wakit pisa yomi ma achiba ma parolato ma shokata shosh katimichi hos isas jasim basua bisachuk ma ishi to ma ikia shokata ilapat kania chikia fi siatak lamahali hogosh anak filit ta lemat akabinoli anicha bokoshi ulali ma nana balalle lawashansha yamamundi shoisha tablet jasim bishma afohachit stayale cha luak istigili chikma ma chimp swatahana to me ama paskihos nani ako untikia cha lubafet na balali lubafet takchit asi bisma takchit taya limat luak tiki to me ama chiba ma dash patistia ma nanit hunglagi mat tunspot mofit shofet to me ama magatogulat liga shokatayat hasimishat hishikshu which I halos be bans hikket meet to haslimia in English.
Please, I was jealous of you, Marcia, because you were getting all the funny spots and I didn't know what was going on. It sounded like some scheming was going on.
In English, it's many moons ago. The opossum had a pretty white woolly tail, and he's always bragging about his tails. And in this clearing spot in the woods, well, they would all come and meet, and they would all speak on this podium, which is a stump. So they all came up there, and on this particular morning, the possum wanted to be the one that speaks first. So he got up there and started to talk about his tail, and because he had a beautiful white tail, and he'd always like to brag about it. So he got up there, and by that time, here comes a stranger sniffing around for his morning meal. And he had a beautiful tail. So the opossum was sort of jealous. So he said, "Who is that?" And one of the participants there was said, "Wow, that's a raccoon." So he went up to the raccoon, and he went up close and looked him over, and he walked up closer, and he cleared his voice and said, "How did you ever get this beautiful tail you got?" And this raccoon just paid no attention to him. He just went on rustling around, just looking for bugs and things that he was wanting to eat. He was still looking for his breakfast, so he paid no attention to him, and he pretended to pay no attention to him. And again, the opossum asked, "How did you get this beautiful tail? You know, and I'd like to have a tail like that." And the raccoon turned around and said, "Well, this person there will get away from me. I'll have to tell him something." So he thought a little bit, and he sort of stood around there and said, "Well," they said, "I'll tell you what you'll do." He said, "You go run right down to the branch down there, and there's some vines there." They said, "Pull up one of those vines and wrap it around your tail and set a fire to it." So the opossum ran down there and wrapped his tail with those vines and set a fire to it. And he got where he couldn't stand the pain, so he quickly just pulled the vines off his tail, and he's all scorched. And since that time, the opossum always had a slick tail, hairless tail. And the moral of the story is, when you're born with something, that the thing you have been born with, don't want any more. Be careful of wanting more than what you have.
Right.
And this.
That's a good one. You know, I forgot to ask you, that's such a beautiful story and seemingly such a rich and humorous tradition. I really enjoyed it. How many people can actually enjoy a story like that in Choctaw today?
Well, the speakers, there's about 20% of the speakers, and 9% of that 20% can read or write. So there are not too many people, youth that are speakers and that can sit around because of the modern things, you know, television and so on, that gets our attention nowadays, that the old stories are diminishing, and very few people knows the old stories. But this story I told is something that it is in one series, and it goes on to another series, how he got even with the raccoon, and it goes on to the bear and how he got his tail, short tail. Goes on to the a man who he fooled by selling up, and the man thought he was dead, took him to his teepee and where he stored pardon me, where he stored his food, and he got away with part of his food. Then he met an owl, and the owl he picked up some pith somewhere, and while he was eating the meat, well, the owl threatened him, and wanted part of his victuals he had, so he gave it to him, and the owl choked. With a
I can see that.
And it goes on and on and on.
A lot of mischief.
Yes,
it reminds me of some characters that I've heard about in other tribes. We're running low on time now, so there was one more thing I wanted to clarify, though, is are Choctaw and Chickasaw the same language, or how close are they? Just briefly.
It seems through the myth goes, I'm assuming there's a myth that the two tribes came to a point along the Mississippi River. The Mississippi one brother took his group to the mouth of the Mississippi, and as he was coming back, it took a generation. At the time he got back, the language had changed, so they say. So the Choctaw went right straight ahead. And
There was kind of a split between the
and
two.
there's many stories of how the two went over there and how they split. They did split. So therefore, the changes could have been through
We
other.
are almost out of time now. We got less than a minute. But let me put it this way. Could a Chickasaw person understand the story that you just
Yes,
told?
I think
They're
it's easier
fairly
for the
close
Chickasaw
then.
to understand Choctaw than Choctaw to
Really?
understand
That's
Chickasaw.
very interesting. Well, let me just ask you one final question, which is, how do you say thank you in Choctaw?
Yakoke.
Yakoke. Well, yakoke to both of you. It's
Ome.
been a pleasure having both of you
Ome.
for my guests. And let me finish with a very brief announcement. There's a language preservation conference coming up in Preston, Oklahoma, October 2nd to 4th. I think we have an address on the screen. There it is. Sponsored by the Oklahoma Native Language Association. Preston is northeast of Okmulgee, and if you get in touch with Greg Bigler at the address or the number shown on your screen, he can give you more information about that. I went to the conference last year, and it was very worthwhile. I definitely recommend it. Thank you again for being my guest, and see you next time on Wordpath.
Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaoni kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaoni kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaoni kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaoni kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaoni kita. Na hene yo hene, na hene yo hene, ana magwana kita, wa pene manaoni kita. Na hene yo